Good afternoon. Calling the Sagaponic Zoning Board of Appeals meeting to order, March 8th, 2024. And please join me in the pledge of allegiance. Pledge of allegiance to the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'm always tempted to say one nation under law.
I brought that. That was accuracy.
One nation under law would make sense to me, because we're supposed to be separated church and state.
That was added.
And the Eisenhower.
That was very new. You can omit it without missing a beat.
Yes. And particularly these days where we're having a creeping religious infusion into our secular law. I'm abandoning that clause in effect. But not in my official capacity, only my personal preference. Okay. So. It's something.
Thanks,
Elliot. All right. So today we have one item of old business, and that is to render a decision on the Zertsky 2005 revocable trust matter pertaining to 871 Sag, Maine. It's application 2 of 2024. And it was for a variance for a principal dwelling of 6,989 feet and roofed accessories of 5,587 feet for a total build out of 12,576. The reason for this was a small principal dwelling and extensive accessory dwellings associated with the former farm use. And the problem for the property owner was to have an adequate sized principal dwelling to support his 5 children and modern day needs without destroying the farm-like quality of the property. So they did proactively remove a substantial amount of excess floor area from the accessories. There was some consultation with the Architectural Historic Review Board, which sort of blessed the plan in terms of what was being preserved and what was being removed. One of the structures being relocated and repurposed as a cabana. Another charming small structure that was characterized as agricultural housing is being preserved as office space for the property with a covenant that there can't be any sleeping or cooking in the facility. And barn, which is contributing structure to the historic district, is being preserved. So we have a decision today which will grant those variances, as I just described, conditioned upon the execution of a declaration of covenants and restrictions. Does anybody have anything to add? In summary, of course, the actual language is embodied in the decision which will be rendered. I'm just summarizing it. But if everyone is in agreement, I'll entertain a motion to adopt that decision.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so we've
Just a quick question, is the declaration of covenants, is that attached to the decision?
yes.
And will stay there permanently into the decision?
Yes, and it will also be separately executed and recorded in the land records. So it is a condition of the decision. And by the way, it pertains to all of the accessory structures, not just the agricultural. I was concerned about the agricultural because it was on the map and the survey, and it was characterized as housing in the past, where the other structures were barns and they weren't really having it. But as the decision, as the covenants read, it prohibits the sleeping and cooking in any of the accessories.
Which is correct.
Okay. All right. So that was a 4-1 decision.
Yep.
You'll let the applicant know.
Before you go on,
Yeah.
we need to approve the minutes.
Oh, I skipped the minutes, didn't I? Yes. Thank you. Getting old. So I will. Has everyone had an opportunity to review the minutes? Anybody have any comments on them? If not, we'll entertain a motion to adopt the minutes of the February 9th meeting.
I'll make a motion.
Okay, I'll second it. All in favor? Aye. All right, so we've adopted the minutes.
And then
now,
also on the next application, I have. the-
affidavits
I do,
of mailing and posting.
I do.
You're always right on the ball with that. I appreciate it. I sometimes forget that. Okay, so that is the application of Krumholz, 119 Sand Dune LLC. And that's the property at that address, 119 Sand Dune Court. And it's for an area variance for front yard, rear yard setbacks, a height variance, and accessory off-street parking, which is triggered by the unique nature of the property, which has two frontages, wetlands, and kind of marshy. I visited the property in half. Some,
Road was it? That one?
yeah, so it's a difficult setup. So I'd like to hear Wayne present for the applicant what they need, why they need it. And you're up, Wayne Bloom.
Good afternoon, board members. Wayne Groen from Sugar Season Growing, Southampton, New York, on behalf of Krumholz 119 Sandy Dune LLC and the Krumholz Sandwich. As was recognized by the board, we had submitted an affidavit post and mailing. Just want to ask if the board has enough exhibits in front of you or the need for anything,
I think we have your complete submission, and we also are in receipt of a letter that was provided to us today by Eric Bregman as counsel to an adjacent property owner, Deborah Buck. So after you make your presentation, we'll have an opportunity who wishes to comment on that.
Yes.
But you may want to address it in advance proactively when you make your presentation.
Thank you. So as the board indicated in the notice, the subject premises is a 41,162 square foot corner lot located on the westerly northern side of Sand Dune Court as it turns and runs parallel to the Atlantic Ocean. Premises trapezoidal in shape and it has 237 feet of lot depth, 223 feet on the west line, and about 153 to 55 feet of frontage in each streets. Interestingly, this property was conveyed out early in the early 60s prior to the filing of the map of Sagaponic Estates, which covers most of the lots north of Sand Dune and south of Sand Dune as it turns to the ocean. The lots in the center there of the C shape were all conveyed out prior to the filing of that map. At the time, it was in the A residence zoning of the town. It was subsequently upzoned to R60, then to R120, and then when the village was formed, it was remains zoned R120. Property has remained in single and separate ownership. It's entitled to the 310/410 relief for rear and side yards. And interestingly, under the village code, section 245-41F, there is relief that can be granted administratively by an action of the planning board pursuant to site plan review, whereby they can reduce the setbacks as a result of consideration of wetland setbacks occurring, which in this case, the town conservation board has issued a wetland permit for the project, and we'll discuss that. The property is improved currently with a house that was first improved in 1980. It was subsequently added onto a couple times, all the way up until 2001. When the town building department allowed first floor additions to the one-family dwelling as the last non-substantial AE9 flooding zone improvements. When you look at the property, there is 3 floors of habitable space. In theory, a 3-story dwelling. Village issued a pre-existing non-conforming CO on our client's purchase in August of 2020. When the client purchased the property, their goal and objectives were to make renovations to modernize the house to current standards. The first thing they encountered, however, is the FEMA regulations. As mentioned in 2001, the HKE 9. Today, it is VE 16 and 17. Requires everything to be on piles and the like. So we spent at least 2 or 3 years working with the building inspector, working with Marty Shea, the town environment division, for solutions here. So the original renovations we sought were to, which would cause under FEMA regulations that we lift the building, put it on piles. The problem with doing that is that this building, which had 3 floors and had an elevation of close to 30 feet height, would have it exceed your height requirements. And while we were considering this board was struggling with several applications dealing with the very same issues, including the property immediately to our south and east across the street, where you actually denied similar relief. So based on that, and based on recommendations of the building inspector, we went to Plan B, which was to basically lock off the small 3rd-story area and redistribute that floor area down below. Therefore, able to lift the structure and put it on piles and have only 2 floors as compared to 3 floors. But what it also allowed us to do is, so the existing elevation of the sea level of the existing house is about a little over 38 feet. Our proposed house will have, each line will be just under 40 feet. Which, the maximum under the code is 40 feet. So the plan.
I have one question.
Sure.
You're estimating at 38, and you're estimating at 40, so.
I'm saying that approximately, but I can leave if you have a specific question. We have our architects are here. And
Everything's in inches now. That's.
No. Yeah. So, but the point is that the roof of the house complies to code.
Right.
Okay. And I'll get to, so what, and in addition, while we're at the conservation board, they requested certain things done to the property and shift the building a little further to the east. They required us to take out an gravel off-street parking area and driveway that is on the northerly side of the property entirely, take that out and replace it with a natural buffer. That required us to provide off-street parking, which would be technically in the front yard. So the relief that this project requires is as follows, and there's 6 different variances. First, as I mentioned, the reconstruction required us to shift the structure, and so we're asking for a variance to allow a front yard of 76.2 from the northerly side of Sand Dunes. We're also asking for a front yard of 67.1 feet from the westerly side of Sand Dunes. And that is due to the shifting of the structure east and south. We're also asking for a slight rear yard variance. Technically, we're at 75.9 currently, and the code requires 80 for with the required relief or allowable relief under the 3/10, 4/10 law, where 100 feet normally is required. So there are 3 dimensional variants, setback variances. And like I said, that section of the code allows the planning board to waive this where the wetland code pushes you against those setbacks. That applicant, we have submitted an application to the planning board and asking for that consideration. And that will be pending. The other variances we're asking for relate to the structure itself. Well, One is off-street parking, as I mentioned, is in the front yard, so there's a gravel parking area with a couple of spaces that are within the required front yard setback. The other two variances relate to the structure, and part of the reconstruction and reallocating space, as we move down, it eliminated outdoor deck and porch areas to the point where the client is trying to recoup that outdoor deck area with a roof deck. So with the structure, there's a roof deck, and of course with the roof deck comes a railing. It's required by the building code, and it is currently a wire railing, see-through wire railing, and the height of that would be at 42.5 feet, where the maximum is 40. So we're asking for a 2.5 foot variance for that railing for the roof deck. The other is probably what I would characterize a hyper-technical interpretation. If you look at the floor plans of the ground floor, there's always the need to get access, and you have a garage, and there is an area, an entry area. I think you still have to go to the ground floor.
Yeah. That's it. 234 feet.
Yeah, so there's a, that's the existing
Also, we're looking at the
proposed.
sorry.
Yeah, there you go.
That's the entry hall,
So
vestibule.
the westerly oval shape is more structural to support the house above. The space in between pillars is going to be used for storage. That doesn't count towards anything. Then you see the garage area, and you see a stairwell, and then you see this entryway where there's an elevator. John Woodsman has indicated there's approximately 274 square feet in that entryway, and he would consider that a story under the code, technically a story. And so he's advised us to ask relief from this board to allow that to remain as a so-called story, even though it's not habitable space, it's just for access. So that's the relief we have. Want to point out, among the mitigation, in addition to moving this further, the wetlands pretty much on the northwest part of our property. So we moved and shifted and provided buffers that Marty wanted. It also includes removing the existing substandard septic and installing a whole new IA system. Not only we're complying to FEMA, as you probably saw, as I heard mentioned earlier, this area is now more prone to flooding. So that's part of the mitigation. As far as the character of the area, if you look back at the map, all the lots in this area are approximately the same size. They have similar sized houses. They're mostly in the center here, are also encumbered by the wetlands. And so the house that we're building, ending up with approximately 5,000 square feet of gross floor area, is not atypical of some of the surrounding houses. And this board, among other things, had granted relief for the garage. They allowed the garage right in the corner of San Diego Court in the front yard, and granted substantial relief on the property immediately toward north. With respect to the property to our northwest, which is what the chairman indicated, you received the letter on, Mr. Bregman is here and he can speak for himself. We had investigated, as we did during our review of the character of the area. We saw that that property has about just under 5,000 square feet of living area according to the town assessor's records. It's also a structure similar, modern structure, which was built back in the time before the FEMA zones. It's non-conforming as far as FEMA is concerned. It's probably tall or taller than our structure. It certainly has a view, and I would say that one of the things Mr. Bregman has asked us to consider is their view shed to the ocean, which certainly is not something that is mandated under the code. But the issue here is the variance for the ramp, not the rest of the house. The rest of the house doesn't really impact Mr. Bregman because we're not asking for variances except for
I'm
the
not sure that
setback.
That's accurate.
The setbacks to the east.
Yeah, the setback
opposed
to
to
the
the
east is
northwest.
adding bulk, which extends laterally the view shed blocking, not just the railing on top.
It could be, yeah. The height, though, the height variance is the rail. And interestingly, as he gets into his letter, his suggestion is that we reduce support of the roof deck. And he suggests that the area that's left of the roof deck be to the east, where in his diagrams, he indicates where the view is.
No,
So
that's
it's a little
interesting.
contrary.
Well, moving the roof deck to the east would mitigate some of the view blockage from the house, which is to the northwest. However, it appears that the access to the roof deck, the stairway, comes up to the very westerly edge. So
Correct.
you might address the practicality of that.
Well, I'll let our
Oh,
architect,
okay, yeah.
we can address that. But we would submit that the view sheds is not one that's protected under the code nonetheless, but it is also something that, given the mitigation, the fact that we have offered everything in compliance to the code as compared to what we started with. What we started with was just lifting the house entirely, just to put it on piles.
I mean, you comment on view shed. That's a key word for me. From having drafted the code to granting variances, Sagaponic is all about view shed. And so whether it's height variances or it's fences or other obstructions, I personally am very sensitive to view sheds. And to the extent they can be preserved, they should be preserved. Now, you say that there is no code with respect to this type of view shed on the property. Nonetheless, in the past, where we have granted variances, certainly on height, and the reason we denied the applicant immediately to the south of this property for building up was substantially attributable to view shed. I mean, the third story was entirely in non-permitted space. And I think it was our own suggestion that that can be mitigated by doing what your client has done proactively in advance, which is removing that portion of the structure which would obstruct height and moving it laterally out across the property. So that's kind of favorable generally. But it would be interesting to hear if there is, first of all, we just got the letter and it's hard for me to visualize. I didn't view the property from that perspective. We have Eric's sketch. But I'm wondering, and he'll have a chance to talk to that issue, as to whether there is some way to mitigate some of the view shed obstruction without unduly interfering with the design and the intentions of the property owner here. And there is some merit to the notion of reducing the roof deck to a degree, although that might be relatively minor in terms of the view shed obstruction if it's merely a wire railing. And that the significant obstruction to the view shed may be the massive bulk on the second story, whether to the west or to the east. So maybe we'll hear more about that.
Yeah, I don't know if you can hear me. I was Mr. Marino. I'm the neighbor directly north of this property. Am I coming in?
Yeah, we hear you. That was what we called the Guarino property, I guess.
Yes, Patrick Guarino's house. We purchased it. I just have some questions. Unfortunately, I just received this package. We spent winters in Miami. When we came home, we just had the opportunity to first receive the survey. We didn't have in the package sent by the village, none of the sketches were included, so we only had the survey and the letter from the village. So our concern is, we spent an appreciable amount of money to purchase the Patrick Guarino house. The view is extremely important to us, and the setback is very important to us. So I'm trying to understand. I'm not an architect, so as a layperson, I see the proposed setback, or I think it is currently 75.9 feet, if I'm reading this correctly. And I think they're trying to move the house closer to our property line. Do I have that right?
as I understand it, that setback is not being offered, right? You're not further.
If
pushing to the
anything,
north.
there's like an entryway that decreases by 1 foot.
The relief being sought here is to the east and south, basically, the two frontages on the Sandon Court where it curves around.
So there's no relief being sought.
So the house would not be closer to you, but there would be more massing of the house to the east of where it is.
Okay, so that's fine. I'm happy to hear that. And then the current height of the house today, from the roof line down to the ground, can somebody tell me what that is? And what are they proposing?
Did you say it's 38 feet approximately?
38.95 feet, I think, the architect.
It's 38 feet, 9 inches, is that what I heard?
And the roof height of the reconstructed house, not the railing, just the roof height would be just under the 40-foot?
Yes,
Permitted?
6 inches below that. is the
Okay,
finish.
so the height of the structure itself, absent the railing, would be compliant, would not require a variance. It would be under the 40 feet that's permitted. The reason for the height variance is that if it's utilized as a walking surface, a deck, it's required to have a railing around it.
That's reasonable. And so the question I have is, I'm not sure when the intention to do construction would be. Do I understand that you're going to be putting piles in, and does that mean the house is demolished and rebuilt? I'm trying to understand the process.
Yeah, you might want to explain that, Wayne.
I'll let the architect.
Yeah, we're gonna lift the house up, and save the floor systems, dry piles and put it on top of the piles.
Okay, so before you go further, introduce yourself.
You should come to the podium so
And-
that.
You ready for his presentation at this point? I mean,
Well,
you're obviously welcome to come back unless it's something
I
you want to
just
say
wanted
first.
to show to the board for some information if you didn't have, but this is our neighbor's house to the northwest.
Oh, good, yeah. Oh, that's the house and the distance to the
These are
north.
photographs.
That's what we used to call the elephant house.
Yes, the color photographs are from, taken today. And the other photographs are taken from the county GIS records.
Okay. The pictures of the house itself aren't particularly helpful. What's helpful would be the perspective from that house towards the proposed.
Right, I think that's what Mr. Brennan had.
Yeah, yeah.
I just.
So we enjoy, we have outer decks facing on the south side of our home. And so we like seeing the ocean. I mean, so if the house that you're building extends further to the west, further to the east, I don't know that would be an issue, but it's hard for me to tell without being at our home and looking, but so the house would be elongated is what I'm understanding. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. It's going to be elongated to the east, which would be.
Elongated.
But how,
But-
but
Closer
if you
to your
even,
property.
you're not,
No, well, the way that your house is angled
but you
slightly
can
to
see
the
where,
southeast,
you can see where his deck is right there.
Yeah.
And then see that.
it'll be partially obstructed by the new structure. However, I mean, property owners are entitled to utilize their property and most of that is going to be within the legal area. Now, Wayne, you might want to clarify something for me too. Because you're making this application to the planning board for the relief that you're entitled to because due to the wetlands, is it the?
Correct.
Right, the relief. How does that correlate with our actions in granting a variance? Are we holding the variance in abeyance if we were to grant one until there's a determination by the town, by the village, or how does this work?
So interestingly, when we started this application process, we were told that the planning board process, site plan comes last. We subsequently found out during this process after submission, of this application that we could make that application. If the board is inclined, I would think you could hold this open until the planning board has had the opportunity to act. If they do in fact grant that relief, we don't need the 3-dimensional variance.
Yeah. That would render this moot. So like the court, Supreme Court,
Yeah,
we shouldn't render decisions that we're not required to render. Right?
exactly.
Unless we're political.
I just,
So-
It's, the town of Southampton grants that, authority to grant that
That's the
relief
town.
to the building inspector.
Yeah.
The village chose to give that to the planning board, which requires, and it creates this issue, who goes first?
Yeah, well, the planning board is the town, is the village
Right.
board. It's merged, it's a single entity. And if they are acting in due course without undue delay, then it would seem to me that we will hear your evidence, but that maybe we will hold the hearing open to give the planning board an opportunity to comment, so that we know whether we're dealing with something that is moot, that doesn't require a decision, or that we should act at the next occasion.
My question would be, we traveled back.
Mr. Marino, just hang on one second, I want to hear.
So I was just gonna say, the planning board's action, if they were inclined to grant it,
Yeah.
would only eliminate the three
Yeah,
dimensional.
not,
Not the height for the railing
Right,
or
and not
the parking in the front yard.
Yeah.
Even though,
so you still need a decision from us, it's a question of which variances are necessary. Okay, but those are important ones, particularly as it relates to this issue of the newer structure expanding to the east, which prior to hearing from adjacent property owners with respect to the impact on them, was certainly preferable from a precedential point of view for us to increasing the heights of the structures, where you have the ability to do it, and certainly where you have the ability to do it within the permitted setbacks, which in prior cases where we have suggested reducing height, they did have the ability to expand the second story within the permissible setbacks without seeking variance, just as a point of interest.
I just want to revisit Mr. Marino's question quickly. So if I'm looking on these two maps, this being what currently exists, and I guess that currently it would be the southeast corner of that house is 103 feet from Sand Dune Court, right? And so then when the new one is, assuming it gets everything it needs, it will then be 67 feet more or less from Sand Dune Court. So actually that home is shifting substantially, to Mr. Marino's point. I just don't want to pretend that's actually not
No, no,
substantial mass moving to the east. However, I think that what Mr. Bruin said is that some of this was at the behest of the wetlands preservation, which largely lies, as we can see on this map, to the north end, soon west of this property. So really the safest zone for them to move this house would be as far to the east as possible, would be mine.
Yeah.
I mean, my preference would be to see the house be moved to the west instead of the east, obviously. And I'm looking at the map that you sent, I see the wetlands preservation area, but it looks to me like the house could be shifted more to the west, and not.
That's basically, there
There's
should
not much-
actually be water back there and is at
Yeah.
times
Yeah,
fully water
and-
back
and,
there.
Apart from the
Can be
terrain,
clear.
which is difficult there, clearly. It's also not that far from the westerly property line, that would be
Right, that's an issue, I guess.
close to the
So-
other house. Yeah,
So
yeah,
I,
You were gonna say something else, Mr. Marino.
yeah, I like to be a good neighbor, so I'm just trying to understand, I'm not trying to be unreasonable with anything I would request, but I do have a couple of questions. So I don't know when a decision would be anticipated to be rendered. We do come back, we spend a lot of the winter in Miami, come back in the early part of May. And I don't know if that's just gonna move quicker than that or not, when they anticipate doing construction. So one, it'd be great if we had the opportunity to get back here in May and meet with the building inspector and understand, because it will affect our property value, should it be something that's undesirable. I'm not saying it is or isn't, but it's hard for me to just see a package the other day, only get a survey, not have a chance to really meet the building inspector and understand what they're asking for. I would not intend to be unreasonable in any feedback I'd give, but but it's moving very quickly for somebody who's put a lot of money into a home. And, wondering if we can't adjourn this till sometime mid-May. I can come back and, is that 2 months?
I don't think we want to adjourn it at this point, certainly not to mid-May. I think your point is well made and well taken, particularly since we've only gotten your comments and Mr. Bregman's comments today. This is the first time this has been presented. There is an application to the planning board for alternate relief with respect to the dimensional setbacks. So I would think that we will not close the hearing today.
Okay.
It will be continued to next month at the very least. As to what happens in April, I can't comment at this point until we see. But clearly, nothing is going to happen before the second Friday in April, which would be the date which we could close the hearing. A decision would not be rendered on that date. So it's quite likely that you're into May before a decision is rendered, and then it's going to take them time to mobilize. They're certainly not going to have this house by this summer. So I thought you were guiding towards a different question, apart from the approval and what gets built, is that it not be going on in the middle of the summer when
That was another part of what I
I'll
was.
try and construction. So I
Yeah, I was
don't
hoping,
it's something to be
I was
concerned.
hoping that would be raised as an issue by this board. So what would really be helpful to residents is if the survey that you sent shows the proposed frame dwelling, right? But could we ask the architect to do some kind of a dotted line as to the existing structure on the survey and then the new proposed structure? So we have some understanding of dimension. I mean, if you, let's say, for example, the current structure is within the body of this proposed structure, then we get a much better perspective. And maybe that could be done, more on a larger, page so we can see, hey, this is, sometimes people don't recognize what the effect is because you're looking at a very small survey with a lot of lines moving in a lot of directions and a proposed structure, but it doesn't give me a lot of comfort that I really know what it's going to look like. And I don't think it's unreasonable to say the architect should give us what's the footprint on the map, on the survey today, and where is it? Do that with some kind of purple dotted line or any other green dotted line. And what's the proposed structure? How's the configuration changing?
To your point, the drawing shows the location, proposed location of the new dwelling, but customarily, we do receive a survey which shows existing structure with a dotted line as you described. I
Right.
didn't see- Yeah, okay, so that's basically what's being requested here. No, but it's not being superimposed.
No, but we
Yeah,
have two
we
separate.
have a survey showing the existing structure, and we have one showing the proposed structure. but
Yeah,
we-
I only received in the mail from the village the proposed frame dwelling. I didn't get the existing, but I would ask.
You do, but the
It's
point,
that red dotted line over there. So
Yeah.
The easy thing for the architect to do is just give us the same green coloring. This is
Yeah,
existing.
I interrupt for a second because it is on the same.
Yeah, it is here, you can barely see
I
it.
could say it is on the survey.
If you
it's
wanna-
not clear.
Oh, okay.
It's a red line.
It is on the
oh, this little dotted line.
This is right here is the existing.
Yeah, I do see it now. There were the contour lines and the other I didn't see.
From there to here is the new, is the extension.
Okay. Yeah, all right, so Mr. Marino, there is a document in the record which does show what you're requesting, which is the relative location of the existing structure and the proposed structure. It was a little hard to see because of everything that's going on that.
Yeah,
I've now pointed out and make sure that you have a copy of that.
right. I would appreciate if we could just ask the architect to simply deal with the dwelling. If we take the survey, kind of clean and just, hey, here's the four corners, so to speak, of the existing dwelling. And this is what it looks like. And this is what the new structure would look like. So we get a sense of the depth and the breadth of it compared to what is there now. And I'd appreciate that. And the fact that you said it would not be moved any closer to my property line, I do appreciate that.
Okay,
If I may.
Yeah.
Mr. Marino, if you contact me, I was the attorney on the notice. I will attempt to get you any and all documents you need to, that makes it easier.
So are you Wayne?
Brilliant.
Okay, thank you, Wayne. I will reach out to you.
Okay, great. I was just gonna ask you, if you need your architect to.
Yeah, I think so, maybe.
It sort of sounds like you got this.
yeah, we would, we'd like to hear from you.
Okay.
Go to the podium.
Good afternoon, I'm Brian Albrecht from John Hopkins Architects Office. Designers of the house.
Okay, so unless you have some presentation to make first, we'll just ask some questions. One thing I'd kind of like to see is and there's a lot of paper here, and maybe it's here, but I didn't see a rendering of the railing question. And how transparent it is. I mean, is it wire, is it glass, and what's that railing?
Did you receive the copy? I had a drawing with, I think she has sort of a.
Do we have that in the package?
It's here, okay.
Can you,
I think he said it's gonna be wire railings.
I saw that, but, oh, here, maybe this is better, actually. Well,
There we go,
that's a little bit better
Yeah.
to see what it is.
like the modern wire railing.
Yeah. Okay, I mean, it's fairly minimalist, and
And
I
our
guess you have
client
to
is,
have this to
and
comply
by the
with
way, if
code.
the board is concerned, our client could change that to glass if that's.
No,
But
sorry.
I know that's not often something the board may want, so I think this is something we thought the village would
They're
want.
like braided wire, stainless steel wire, right?
Like the
And
thin wires.
Do you need as many wires?
For code,
Is that
yeah.
code because of the
It's
separation
worded
of space?
separation.
Or, okay. So that's about as minimal as you can get. So what about the question of, I see the access is at this end. How much difference would it make if some of this were in the middle? Is that feasible or is that?
Well, it sounds like you're asking us some questions, and I think,
Yeah.
rather than, and Mr. Laffey is actually the
Yeah.
designer, so rather than put
Yeah.
him on the spot, we can certainly go back and consider any of those things you're asking. you know.
See if there is the ability to diminish the view shed in position of.
And the location of this stairwell is Russian.
I don't know, maybe it could come back the other way as opposed to this direction and.
You have
Yeah,
windows on the other side, so. Nice.
Okay, and just asking the question as to whether there is some mitigation possible there and feasible to be considered. And the hearing is being kept open so that we can address that, whether you can or you can't, or how you propose to do it next month. All right, and I guess we're getting some clarity on the relative,
We can, as the board was just looking, we can try to, that one plan, as you know, the conservation board requires everything on it, becomes so busy that you
Yeah.
can't see things, so we can boil it down to just show you the existing.
yeah, maybe
proposed
that would
overlap.
make it a little bit easier to
Visually,
visualize.
it's a little difficult to.
Yeah, I didn't see it.
We can create a drawing that shows that.
Yeah, just simplify, filter out some of the unnecessary.
Yeah, would it be possible to move the stairs to the west side? Because we face the back of that house. And, if the front of the house looks extremely attractive, switch to the south elevation. But I face the north elevation, and to be honest, the north elevation is not very attractive. And it makes it look like one of the kind of motels you see in Montauk. Those little stairs, if those could be relocated to the westerly side, I think it would be better for everybody. I mean, because
Just
The-
not.
We've got the for the moment.
those stairs are an eyesore for me, and we're gonna look right at that house. And we're not gonna see it if it's on the westerly side.
Well,
The front of the house looks beautiful, the back does not.
Your comments are as to the aesthetics as opposed to the legalities of the structure and the mitigation from a code point of view. So let's confine that to this for the time being. Anybody have any other questions?
I'm just curious, so you said you were going to, the existing house will be lifted, and then the pilings are poured or driven, how's that?
There'll be wood piles driven.
Uh-huh. So then, so the house slides off, kind of like.
Off inside, yeah.
Driving the
Piles.
piles and then lifting it and putting it back on top.
So you're moving it 30 feet.
And the large, the round, and it's, so this is different than most. Like, you're leaving this house sort of like breezeway beneath it, whereas most houses are completely enclosing at the bottom
With breakaway.
with breakaway walls.
Right.
Right, so the difference in this is that you can walk under this house or drive or park. I think you should park.
It's
Well,
got-
the garage is under it.
Well, the garage is under there, but then
And a
there's
couple
also,
of
it's kind
parking
of.
spaces.
There's a breezeway in between
It's
that
tough to
storage
fit
area
the
and-
necessary,
Yeah,
difficult to fit the necessary parking spaces altogether. So you got a couple of them tucked under there.
yeah.
Front of the house.
That's
Yeah.
open. These areas are open. You drive into the garage this
Right.
way. This is open,
Yeah.
an entrance here.
Like a porch.
And that's the storage where all
Yeah.
the other support.
In fact, I see what might be characterized by the building inspector as a ninth bedroom is characterized as an office, but it is taken into account in terms of the requisite parking spaces. Apparently, you're legal on that. You know, if it was an office. But it's got the bathroom and it's got the facilities that render it legally a.
Does it stay in wood? Is that obvious? Or is the whole thing concrete? In the end,
I'm sorry.
the house is wood,
Wood siding, yes, vertical wood siding.
yeah.
So I question for the board. Is there no architectural review process from the standpoint of aesthetics, or aesthetics not counted by the Village of Sagapon?
Not us.
It's not an historic district. The Architectural Review Board can review any of the structures in the village. But this is not in the historic district, and their decisions or their suggestions are merely advisory. They're not binding in any event.
To a degree too, they're keeping an
Yeah.
they're changing, but they are keeping an existing structure as well, which
Okay,
could be hard to redesign.
any other questions for this gentleman? We'll let Mr. Bregman speak if he wishes. Okay, thank you. But you can ask him.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Eric Bregman. With VLSC. I represent Deborah Buck. See, components of the house. Do you have an aerial? Yes. So just, I think you all understand that this is part of the, he stuff's out.
Slight overlap in corners.
This was Mr. Marino's house. But also the neighbors. Well, thanks, yeah. It's great. It's weather and winter. Weather reasons. There are two concerns. From the two variances, one of which, as the gentleman mentioned, may be moved to the planning board, comes out differently, but it would be the same issue. And that if you put the survey up again. I think if you put the survey up again. That is, the two variances allow two things. One is it allows an extension of the house to the east further than it would otherwise be allowed to extend. And as we just pointed out with Mr. Marino, this part of the house is the extended part as opposed to what is there now. That would be limited if the full setback were required. So that variance allows more extension in that direction.
Do you know how many feet that is by any chance? What the differential is?
Yeah, that dimension is
67.
67, and it's, I believe 100, is it 90 or 100? 80 is required.
And the existing.
So it's 13 feet that
And the
it's,
existing dwelling is how many feet from it?
Right.
103?
Yeah,
Let's see.
so it's a big difference, but it's a smaller variance. It's 13 feet. And that relates to also, this is not just a redistribution of the third floor to the rest of the house. It's making a house which is now about 2,800 square feet in gross floor area into a house that's about 5,300 square feet. Now, the gross floor area that's calculated is a couple hundred feet less than that because they have credit for mechanical rooms and other kinds of things. But the physical space, it is 5,300.
but there is no variance being sought for FAR. It's
No.
totally, the size of the house is within the code. And the objectionable, or the objection is the 13-foot encroachment to the east of the structure into the easterly side yard or front yard setback, which is what's being sought for the variance.
Yeah, and it's 13 feet of 2 floors, and you have in my letter a picture of how that will fit usually.
Well,
It's a sketch
It's a sketch.
without any perspective as to from how far away it is, and I mean, it's difficult, yeah. I mean, due to the time, that may have been the best that you could do for today. But it is hard to visualize actually whether it's the scale and what the perspective is from where the picture was taken, and from which part of the bunkhouse it was taken.
My understanding.
Yeah.
It's up to pictures from before, and you can see the winter pictures. Today's pictures. That it was taken from her deck.
Mhm.
On her house, which you can see in the area. But I agree, it is not
Yeah.
the most precise.
We get the point, but
That's
it's
the-
difficult to
Right.
visualize the actual impact. And when anyone buys a home, they can buy a home where the properties all around it are already developed, or whether they may be potentially developed, and you can't freeze your view sheds as long as they're in compliance with law. Your objection is that the particular variance being sought would increase the obstruction to the view shed as opposed to one that's built as of right, 13 feet further away. But in mitigation of that is the fact that the height is being reduced as well.
I didn't really get used.
Well, no, it's not. It would require a variance in height, or require a variance to the east if they're going to preserve this amount of floor area. Right.
But
It's a variance for the rail, not for the height.
The variance, what I'm saying is, if they wanted to get a 5,800 square foot house on the site, they're either gonna need a variance for height, or they're gonna need a variance in the dimensional sidelines. Is that right? I mean, I don't know that you could squeeze the house in otherwise, given the property, terrain, wetlands, 2 front yard situation.
Aside from totally reconstructing an abandoned house,
Yeah.
I'm sure there's some building envelope Marty Shea might allow us, and that's another significant factor. That, you know, it was 2 years with Marty Shea
Yeah.
on the wetlands to get some acceptance of this project. So his goal would be shifting us 125 feet from the wetland line to the point where the house would be 30 feet off of Sand Dune Court. So you know, there's a tremendous amount of balance that's taking place here.
And I understand that, and that's what we're talking about balance. We're not talking about being dogmatic. You have to be exactly, we're talking about what the balance should be. And there are a couple, but I wanted the board to understand, I think you get the point. This is a much bigger house than what's there now. That's okay, it's not out of It's not out of sync with the neighborhood in terms of size. So. But it does have a detriment to my client. The other variance is the height variance. And what the height variance does is it allows the roof to be used as a deck. Now, I did not include in my letter, I apologize, but it's in the file. I made some copies. Of the drawing for the roof. This, that's, we have size. And we have that. So we have this.
It's in our pack.
Yes. If we put that on the. Go ahead.
Oh, we have.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
we
you
have
have,
that.
okay, so you all have. Yeah.
It's in our packet.
Okay.
It's right here.
So.
I know.
Yes.
So
That's fine. Yes.
it's an 1,852 square foot roof deck,
Yes.
which, but for the peculiarities of the access, which is up the stairway to the west, could presumably be diminished in gross size and reducing the visual impact, the view shed impact from your client's property. Except that unfortunately, the access is directly in the area where the reduction would be most effective.
Well, let me speak to that, because this is not just a view shed issue. It is partially view shed, but what the variance does is allow the roof to be used as a deck. Without the variance, you could use it as a roof deck. That does two things. One, it puts up the visual thing, but more importantly, from Mayor Buck's point of view, and she will be here, I believe, in April, so she can speak to this at that time. So, is the impact of the activity on the roof. It's not just that it's visual, it's that this is, it's a big house, it's a nice house, they're gonna have parties, they're gonna have kids running up and down. And Ms. Buck tells me today, she can watch, she knows what color hair the housekeeper has. I mean, she looks right into this corner of the house. And, part of that is life. But what this does is makes it this variance allows much more activity and much more disruption for not just her view shed, but what she's looking at. Right, and the activity that's going to be going on, and people should have a roof and it should have a deck, right? Again, we're talking about a balance. We're not saying no deck, right? We're saying, and that leads to a conclusion exactly the opposite, Mr. Chairman, that the part of the deck that ought to be reduced, it's the east side that ought to be used, not the west side, to get it further away from.
No.
this side.
Well,
You
Mr.
say-
Marino would probably disagree.
Well,
No, wait, you say used or reduced, did you say?
I'm saying if there's,
If you were going to reduce the roof deck, which
Yes.
side of the roof deck would you want reduced?
the west side.
That's what I said.
No, not used, reduced.
No, I
Maybe
said
misunderstood.
that it would seem to me that the view from the property to the northwest, which is Ms. Buck's property,
All right.
would benefit from a reduction of the roof deck on the westerly side. But that is where the stairway and the access is, which makes it difficult to accomplish that.
Well, I don't know, I'm not an architect, I don't know enough about how the whole construction and whether that could be changed.
Well,
It's-
I've already asked that question to be looked at to see whether there's some way to mitigate that impact. And acknowledged previously
You could do a
that
walkway, maybe.
the reduction of the roof deck might be helpful. And the reduction on the westerly side of the property would be more helpful than on the easterly side of the property, if that's possible. Except recognizing that the design of the stairway and the walkway is all over to the westerly end at this point. Right.
I mean, wouldn't you be able to create a walkway down and then just kind of
Yeah.
railing it off
Yeah,
and and have the west end.
I
be-
think I have just a question
Yeah.
about roof decks in general.
mhm.
How are they, like? They're not added to the floor area because they're unroofed, right? So pretty much anybody with a flat roof, providing their railing doesn't go above the height,
Correct.
could expand any house onto the roof.
We're entitled to have a roof deck. You
I
acknowledge
agree.
that.
Yeah,
I agree.
but I think what you're saying is you're concerned about the size of this roof deck, and could it not be a smaller roof deck and therefore a smaller variance just because we're talking about less space on the roof?
But for the height of the railing, there would be no issue about the roof deck. You
Right.
can have that roof deck.
Right,
The question is that in return for granting a variance to allow the roof deck, the railing is a relatively minor negative impact on the view shed. But the use of the roof deck in
More about the
proximity,
activity. More about the
to that property is.
I see a lot of roof decks, I've never seen anyone on them,
Well,
like I literally.
you don't need it.
There's one on Sag Beach, on Gibson. Never seen
You
it.
know, and Mr. Marino weighing in again, my preference would be to reduce the amount of roof deck on the easterly side where our view to the water, if the variance is granted,
I'm not getting this.
I know.
Yeah, right. Mr. Marino, hold your comment, please. Mr. Bregman is still in the midst of his presentation.
Well, actually, I'm almost done. I mean, I think we've gotten the points. I think.
All right, well, we're obviously looking for a solution here that allows the owner to redevelop the property, both in compliance with FEMA and for current family needs in terms of size and at the location, given a property that's a very difficult development site because of a number of characteristics, and yet mitigating any adverse impact of their doing so on the neighbors. And we only learned of any negative impact on the neighbors moments before this meeting began. So I think we've heard a fair amount of what those impacts are, where they come from, and how they might be mitigated. And we're going to continue to explore that in the April meeting with everyone here, including Mr. Marino and Ms. Buck, having an opportunity to make their own suggestions or speak with the applicant's attorney, I presume, and architect, and for the architect and the applicant to come back with some suggestions of their own. I think that's all we can do at the moment. And again, some of the suggestions that have made may or may not be practical, and they may or may not be useful. I think that Dawn's suggestion a few moments ago, so that you're not interfering with the existing structure where the stairway comes up on the westerly end of the property, but confining the stairway arrives on the northwest corner of the property and has a narrow pathway for a third or quarter or some percentage of the roof that is not roof decked, so that you draw a north-south line.
Go like that.
Yeah, or farther over. So you could reduce the size of the actual roof deck where the activity would be taking place to the east without having to reconfigure the access. So that's something maybe you can consider.
May I ask an architect a question? I'm just wondering what this means, EFDM roof.
That's the surface, it's a membrane.
Yeah,
It's like a rubber.
It's a rubber membrane that waterproofing.
that's the area we're not utilizing.
But that is flat across, like you could,
We could
You
use
could,
that,
okay.
we chose not to.
but it's not open as in the other section.
So to go further with that, the membrane then you built on top of that with wood, it's gonna be wood deck.
Just in that particular area where it's listed as the EP.
No, on the deck part itself.
Yes, I'm finished.
Under the deck.
So they'll have
Yes, the rubber will be underneath that.
sleepers, yeah, okay.
Last thought,
Yes.
one other thought, and I don't know whether it's possible at this stage, and it might involve, would involve going back and talking to Marty, which always is a
I'm glad she-
interesting experience. moving the house south towards the other side, because that would help both. in this
I think that,
And if you look at where the wetlands are.
but if you look at the layout of the interior of the house, they have a very clear idea going on there.
But all I'm saying is one thought is take the whole house
Yeah.
as it is and move it south.
Well, we have it sitting in, that will push us to BE 7 further south. Or another foot.
And the
Well, that
septic
was
system.
Oh, really?
Design.
Oh,
Oh, so, okay,
Yeah.
that's a
One
good
foot.
point.
just a couple of feet there is
Could
gonna
make a
Yes.
difference.
put you into a higher schema level.
Overload, huh?
Okay.
That's their answer.
Well, yeah, otherwise, it seems like not a bad idea because it's not obstructing anybody. If it were moved to the south,
Except
except you could always cut it down,
the entire.
raise it up to
Right.
FEMA.
You-
You also have septic in the grade.
Yeah. Yeah, the grade.
Where is the
The
septic?
problem is 8 bedrooms, huh?
Where is the septic gonna be?
That's the other, that's another
I mean,
solution,
I
is a
mean,
smaller
it's
house.
not, but I think that was the solution in zoning restricting the size
There,
of houses to the lot, but it can only go so far.
Where is it now?
I
Same place?
agree
Is that
completely.
septic?
Yeah, I noticed that as well. That's
Like,
my
I mean,
comment
this
on
is
the
what
office.
is making all these houses so difficult, is that these
I know.
That's
Nine
good.
bedrooms is a big house.
You got, you guys.
Yeah. Sorry, our stenographer
I
is
think-
not able to pick
I-
up the conflicting conversations.
I think that I've been on the zoning board long enough that I understand the difference between somebody's desired design and like our input. But I do think one of the problems that we're constantly faced with, and then therefore neighbors are faced with, is the mass of these houses. And I know that the code worked really hard to address that by making the size of the house relate to the size of the lot. But all of these problems are created by a mass of a house not really being environmentally situated on a property that can sustain it. This lot itself is reduced substantially by the amount of wetlands on it, as the 2 years with Marty Shea would propose. And so, you know, in a perfect world, people would reduce the size of the house. But this is not a perfect world. Sorry, you have to try to
Land values in Sagaponic
work it that way.
substantially preclude smaller houses on these lots.
What does?
The land values, the costs and the
But what's the
nature.
use of the land value
No,
if the whole, that
yeah.
doesn't make any sense, I
No,
don't buy your
well-
argument.
It's not an argument, it's an observation that it is clearly a problem, the size, and it was taken into account when we put an FAR limitation. I think I recall saying when real estate brokers said you're gonna destroy the values in Sagaponic if you limit the size. I said, come 3 feet above natural grade with clear story windows, and you can have your gyms and your movie theaters and your maids' rooms and your pool room and everything else where it's not obstructing the view sheds. Unlimited square footage underground, so that you can have your size without destroying the very character of the village, which is the open space. So I agree 100% with you. I would like to see smaller residences, but it's not within our purview unless we amend the code to prohibit the size. We have some areas where we can restrain the development. And it does give us a little bit of leverage.
I would suggest, if I might, that if you're granting a variance, they're asking for something that is not within conforming code. And the input from the neighbors should be strongly considered. And they purchased a house. I looked at the house when it was for sale after we purchased the Guarino house. And so you know what you're getting when you're buying a house, right? And you know you have the opportunity to have your lawyers and your architects advise you as to what the codes are. So they're coming before you to ask for change within what is the setback requirements today. And I'm not saying we shouldn't be open-minded. I certainly want to be open-minded, but there's a limit to how open-minded, because our porch is in the front of our house facing south, which is Patrick did a very nice job designing that. We look towards the ocean, and moving this house to the east blocks our view. So, you know, and while that, I know that our view is not something that we have the right to bring up as an issue, but your ability to grant the variance is the issue if it's detrimental to me, right? So
First, you do have the right and the ability to comment on adjacent properties. That's why you're given notice of these things. And we operate within a number of restraints and requirements for the granting of a variance. There are various tests, one of which is whether the applicant has a self-created hardship. Your comment about them buying the property with these issues in place, certainly there's an element of self-created hardship here. That's not determinative of the result. The second thing is whether it's going to have an adverse effect on the environment, whether it'll have an adverse effect on the neighborhood, which includes the neighbors, such as their view sheds and their use of their property. And another one is whether it's the minimum variance necessary in order to allow the property owner to solve the problem that they're confronted with on the property to accomplish the result that they're seeking. So we do take all those things into account. And your input is very important to us, and we are trying.
I appreciate that.
However, we also are constrained not to unreasonably restrict an individual's use of their property, taking into account all of these circumstances, and deny them a variance where one might be warranted. So it's
Right. No, I respect that. You know, our main residence is in Center Island, which is in Oyster Bay. And we sought a variance to square off a guest structure, a 2-foot by 2-foot expansion, and we are at 8.22 acres. And I can tell you that variance, they tortured us for 2-foot by 2-foot, and that nobody could see, right? So we're not talking about a 1-foot, 2-foot variance request when you're going to the east side of the property. From what I think I heard you say, it's 13 feet. That is not on a very small piece of property, that is not an insignificant variance. Percentage-wise.
The reality of the variance is another component of our determination. So all of that is being taken into account.
Well, but my plan is to try to get out there, even though we're supposed to leave for Miami, and try to get a sense of what this would really mean. That's why as soon as I could receive the existing footprint on the survey and the proposed footprint, I'd appreciate it. And you say the next meeting will be mid-April?
Rowan will get you the paperwork that you've requested, and you have the opportunity to appear here again in April. Personally, on Zoom, you can submit written comments to us. If you do that, I'd appreciate it if we get them at least several days before the hearing.
Of course.
Have an opportunity to review them before having to analyze and discuss them in the next.
No, I respect that. Do we have a date for April or not yet?
April 12th, 3 o'clock.
April 12th, okay. So
Always the second Friday of the month, with rare
April
exceptions.
12th. Okay. Terrific, I appreciate everything.
Comments, questions?
Two, I guess. The property is within the FAR, and like the last statement about moving it south, I don't think it would affect his view hardly at all, even if they moved it south, so I wouldn't recommend moving it south at all.
Well, we've already heard that that's not really practical in
Not
any
practical
event
anyway.
because of the FEMA lift that would be required.
And I'd be interested to see the view from their house before the next meeting.
See, if it were designed for new construction, then perhaps diminishing the square footage to the east so that it wouldn't encroach that additional 13 feet, maybe it would be less. Bedrooms could be made smaller, or one fewer bedroom, or a relocation of a bedroom where a mechanical room is. There'd be more flexibility, but we're lifting an existing house and it's not rebuilding the entire thing. So there are certain practical constraints as to how one can mitigate the effect of this redevelopment. Wayne, you have anything further to say?
No, I think we've heard, I really appreciate all the comments and Mr. Bregman, and Mr. Marino's comments. We'll certainly go back to discuss those with our client and the architect, and take into consideration and be prepared for the next meeting.
Great. And if any other suggestions or comments that the board may think of after we adjourn today?
I guess I have one more comment.
Yeah,
On the view shed, this is not a view shed of unobstructed views by far anywhere. You're looking through two sets of properties. So it's not what I would call a pristine view shed. It's by far the third from that, you're the third row back from the water. So my view of a pristine view shed, I don't think it's quite there.
You may be correct.
I
I
understand.
don't know. You may,
Yes.
that's why I want to go there. I want the opportunity to go to the property, go to our deck, take a look, take some pictures, because you could be right and you could be wrong. I don't know. I mean,
I would
honestly.
love to see the view myself.
yeah, we'll do that. We'll visit the property again in view of in light of the current comments. And as I started to say, after we adjourn today, if members of the board, having had an opportunity to do that, or review the papers further, or Eric's letter, which we just got, then we will advise Pat and she will let you guys know so that you can address those questions or comments before the next meeting.
And the view shed from these pictures, there's not much view here. There's houses and bushes. There's no bush.
Quite honestly, we do get a view.
Take it from the ground
That's
floor
from the
back.
ground floor.
No, we
North.
have a fairly good view of the ocean, believe it or not. We
That's
see
not
the
right.
ocein, we see the ocean quite nicely from our terrace. Between the houses, there's a nice piece.
Beachhead. Okay, we're giving our friend here a hard time because we're all talking over each other. So
I'm
let's try to refrain.
If I may, the pictures in my letter are from Ms. Buck's house.
Yes.
And they show the rest. I believe that we can make arrangements if people want access to our house to go on our deck and see what it looks like from there, if that's.
I would like that.
Sure.
I will.
We could do the same. We can make arrangements to.
We have to make a couple of visits, otherwise it's open meeting. If the three of us went at the same time.
You bring my ladder.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not hiding the ball.
No, well, in terms of if she has no objection to people appearing on the property, we could go at our own schedule. If she would like to be there when we're there, then we'll need to schedule some.
I will speak, I have not talked to her
Okay,
about
no,
it.
yeah, well, you can get back to us on that. Anybody else, or can we continue the meeting to the April, what'd you say, was the 12th, April 12th meeting? And I'll entertain a motion to do that. I'll make that motion. Can I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so we will see the applicants and I won't call them proponents. The
No, we're
neighbor-
not, we're not.
The loyal opposition next month. And let's, anytime, hang a motion to adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, all of you.
Who seconded it?
I don't know, I know, whatever I have.
I'm confused.
You seconded, correct?
I said.
No.
I'm selling this property, I'm representing everybody out of the back and forward. Bargain and sale.
No, this is the letter.
No, I realize that.
Not only do I represent